What do insanely poor people buy that ordinary people know nothing about? Story 1. I was so poor once that I would go to Long John Silver's and order a water and crunchies, then sit there and watch the people that would dine in. It was amazing how little they ate, and then they would leave without dumping their tray off in the trash. Fries, hush puppies, chicken, fish, all untouched. No, I didn't eat a piece that was bitten off of. I once saw a woman order a 2-piece fish and more for her kid. That ate one hush puppy and a few fries, and then left the rest of it there. It was the best I had eaten in weeks. Glad that's behind me now. Story 2. My dad was also king of this too. Our bonding nights consisted of a couple rented movies from Blockbuster, turkey bacon on the George Foreman grill, and instant cappuccino powder and milk. He would save up the entire time between visits, and when my sister and I visited, we would go on one big adventure. One time we went horseback riding, another time we went cave exploring. We didn't have fancy camping gear either, we had his basic issue field stuff from the army. He would make the coolest forts and we'd spend a night out in the woods and play euchre or rummy by the campfire. My sister, my dad and I played a game called Super Spy, where my dad would leave clues, draw maps, pretend to be a character and give confessions. My sister and I would have to figure out the plot, who was the bad guy, and save the day. My favorite thing we ever did was follow the creek out on my grandparents' land and discover these little waterfalls. He bought a disposable camera and took my picture in front of every one of them. We made a colored map on poster paper, colored a legend, and he glued the pictures of me and my waterfalls onto it. I would lead my cousins on trips along the creek with my super spiffy map me and my dad made. I get overwhelmed at times thinking about how hard he tried to make the time we had together awesome, and never about what we couldn't do because we were too poor. Story 3. Near where I live there is one of those guys who cleans out basements and storage buildings for a living. He also has these huge yard sales 2 or 3 times a year along a main highway. Pretty incredible to see. He even puts up traffic control and parking signs because so many people stop when it is busy. This guy saves up all of the kids' clothes he comes across during the year, and toward the beginning of August he has a yard sale that is mostly clothing. The moms from the local trailer parks all come to this sale and fill bags with clothes for their kids, which he then puts in his garage and holds on layaway. These mothers come to his back door and make weekly payments on used school clothes and shoes for their kids all month. Story 4. I drove on a flat spare to a discount tire here in Austin one morning. My husband's car was our only means of transportation and I had to take home to work first. I got to Discount Tire to get them to patch my flat and it was the same thing. The tire was bald to the mesh stuff and another tire was, too. We had $23 to our names, we had just paid our rent. And I asked him to please just fix the flat and we would deal with it when we could. He told me that he couldn't, in good conscience, let me drive on those tires, and then gave me 2 tires, just gave them to me. He said that he couldn't stand the thought of a tire blowing out on me, so he would take care of it. We are much better off now, and whenever I need anything tire related, I go to that Discount Tire. Story 5. A buddy of mine went through a tough time a few years back, and I didn't know about it until he told me about a year ago. One thing that stuck with me was that he made just enough money to survive. By survive, he meant literally enough money to pay rent, utilities, and the cheapest, worst food he could buy. He couldn't afford transportation, not even the bus. He told me about a span of a few months he went through where he literally only ate water, dry noodles, and peanut butter. For a few months, he worked at a restaurant and they cut his hours. He couldn't find other work. His first big reality check was that he had to sell his car to make rent 1 month. The next month he started selling other unnecessary items like his old TV, some old appliances, and his nicer clothes. He got to the point where he was doing his laundry with dish soap in his sink. He couldn't afford deodorant, razors, or any of the things we take for granted so he'd steal them from the grocery store. He didn't like to do it, but he had no choice. He never got caught. When he told me all of this, I was floored. I wish he would have told me when it was happening. I would have helped any way I could. At that time, I was by no means living a fancy lifestyle, but I could have thrown him a $20 spot here and there to help him put some groceries in the house or some TP in the bathroom. Fuck, just thinking about it makes me ill. He's still poor today, but he works full-time and is happy at least from what I see. Story 6. About a year ago, I was addicted to alcohol, 4,000 kilometers from home. Dropped out of school and living in my 20-year-old car. I got so used to eating microwave potatoes that I considered walking into a 7-Eleven and pocketing a handful of mayo packets while pretending to buy a hot dog, a special treat. I grew up distinctly middle class and generally did not want for much. My recent experience has really put into perspective the difficulties experienced by people who are or have been in similar situations to myself, but bear the burden of direct responsibility to kids and family. Things have gotten a lot better since I've accepted the help of other people. Seriously, even relatively tiny gestures of kindness will go a long way with someone who is literally struggling for survival. Never underestimate the impact you can have upon another person's life. I'd probably be dead by now if it weren't for the unconditional love and support of friends, family, and random strangers. Instead, I'm 25, relatively healthy again, and back in school trying to finish off my engineering degree. Story 7. Back when my dad had just left us, my mom and I fell on harder times than usual. We went from a house with 5 kids and 2 parents to a tiny duplex for just her and I. Remember we would go to the Dollar Tree and every now and then I'd be able to get a toy. Do you guys remember the little for boy and for girl bags they had? It was like 5 toys for the price of 1. That was like winning the lottery, man. I was so happy with those things and my mom would get them for me just to see me smile. However, soon after we sort of pulled out of the worst bit, but we had a few little dips here and there. Food was never an issue, but we had cable turned off sometimes and things like that. I remember one day my mom came home and said she had a surprise for me. My child self had the audacity to ask, "Is it from the Dollar Tree?" with a condescending tone. To this day I have no clue why I asked that, because I felt immediately shitty once her face had that look of embarrassment. I am 18 now and was about 12 then. I've since said sorry and she had no clue why I cried saying it. People ... take what your parents give you and thank them for every little gift. They love it and they might not have the money, but they're sure as hell going to find a way to give you the world the best way that they can. Story 8. Grew up poor here. Here are some things I noticed. Growing up we were never allowed to buy individual servings of things. I still feel guilty every time I buy my toddler individually packaged yogurts, cheese strings, etc. fruit. Buying fruit was a special occasion. Underwear and socks at the thrift store. I don't think my parents bought these, but a lot of my lower income clients buy them. I used to think, wow, who buys underwear at a thrift store? Yup, some people don't really have any other choice. At least for Latinos, tortillas. Sometimes you wouldn't even have anything to put on them, but you could butter on them or salt and just eat them like that to fill up your stomach. Formula. I once saw my neighbor feed her infant child with rice water because they couldn't afford formula. Bulk beans. I live in Utah and my brother-in-law recently bought 10-gallon drum of dry beans from the Mormon community store. He's not even poor, he just said he saw it. Remembered his mom used to buy those growing up and then couldn't resist. Dollar store toys. Our Christmas was always dollar store growing up. If you haven't ever seen those toys, they are the cheapest of the cheap. Fake Barbies that reek of overprocessed plastic and break after a week. Story 9. And now I'm also crying. This brought back some memories when I was growing up in Cuba and my dad has his whole career ripped away from him and was forced to become a carpenter, but this is for another story. Before we left Cuba, legally I will say, we had to turn in our rations card months in advance. The government would keep track of how much food a family was allotted. We didn't get very to begin with, so my parents would do the best they could from going to the black market, getting help from family when they could, or scrounging around. I remember growing up that my best and fondest memories were from my school lunches because I would get so much in my plate. My young mind didn't know how to process this much information, I would tell myself, when in all reality, it was meager scraps. I was happy though. I would try to pick out the small rocks out of my meals. Sometimes I'd find wood chips, maggots, whatever else. Didn't matter, it was food. I was 6 years old and I was hungry. Going back to months prior to leaving my country of birth, my parents had to turn in our IDs, our rations card, and everything else that could have helped. No rations card, no food, no money. We were left with nothing. I didn't know until years later that both my parents went nights starving to give me what little food they found from the black market or what some family members and friends in our neighborhood could spare. When we finally came over to the US, I cried and felt guilty about eating an apple and a Twix bar. I'm actually crying right now. It took months, if not years, of adjusting to this and several months of carefully monitored diets because I came over to the US malnourished, but alive. I was about 55 pounds when I was 11. My dad has his title reinstated and began teaching. My mother retired as a nurse and I'm currently giving back to my country, the US, by serving in the military, and I'm thankful of being here. Some people don't know how good they have it. Story 10. Nothing. Not being able to buy anything at all for the next 20 days until your assistance check comes. Your bank account is minus $4 in the hole because you took every last cent of the $600 you get a month to pay your rent, power, and food bill. You buy the cheapest food. You don't buy anything for full price. You don't buy anything that's in more than $3 per item. No luxuries, no snack food, no long-term purchases. After your rent and utilities are paid, you're left with very little for food. Where I live, it's a choice of either food or heat, lights, and it gets damn cold in the winter. The food you buy lasts you about 10 days, and then it's gone, as much as you try to spare it and break it up into smaller meals, making soup and broth with what you bought. It only lasts so long until it's done. After that, it's not about buying anything. It's about doing what you can to survive. Food banks only allow you to use them once a month here. Both food banks I've tried have given me rotten food the majority of the time. So then you turn to family, friend to borrow just a little bit to do you until the end of the month. Then at the end of the month you have to pay them back and you have to cut your expenses even shorter. And the cycle continues. It used to be funny how my parents would tear apart the couch cushions to nickel and dime their way on the bus to get to work or any type of appointment. Now it's not. Now I know, because I'm doing the exact same thing. The system aims to keep you poor. I would even go as far as to say they want you to perish so you're one less thing they have to worry about. Just this month I found out I may be getting my $60 special diet to gain weight cut off. It doesn't even surprise me anymore. Thankfully, I'm studying hard for my grade 12 and going to attempt to get into a trade school. As far as I'm concerned, I'm as good as dead if I don't get off this helping system. You don't buy anything when you're poor, you sell your dignity and any pride you have for a healthy meal. Please drop down your stories in the comments. I would love to make videos on them too. And also don't forget to like and subscribe.